The Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad in simple English, Part 7, Yagyavalkya or Muni Kanda, Chapter 3, Sections 1 to 5. This part deals with the various questions put to sage Yagyavalkya by other learned Brahmins about sacrificial worship and its rewards, about man in bondage and with his future at death, about the unknowability of Brahm, and about renunciation as the way to know Brahm. King Janaka Videha performed a sacrifice at which many gifts were given to the priests. Among those who came to the sacrifice were wise and learned Brahmins from the kingdoms of the Kurus and the Panchals. Seeing so many learned ones gathered together, Janak was curious to know who was the wisest and the most learned among them. He therefore had 1,000 cows with 10 coins of gold tied to the horns of each cow enclosed in a pen. He then made this announcement: Learned and wise Brahmins, whoever among you is the wisest and the most learned, he may take away all these cows. None of the Brahmins present dared to take away the cows. Then Yagyavalkya said to his pupil, Samasravas, my dear, these cows are ours. Take them home. Samasravas started to drive the cows away. The Brahmins who were present were outraged at this and said, How can he, on his own, declare himself to be the wisest and the most learned amongst us? Aswal, the Hotra priest of Janak who was present, then asked Yagyavalkya, How can you be so sure that you are the wisest and the most learned amongst us? Yagyavalkya replied, I bow to the wisest and the most learned, but I just want to have these cows. So Aswal decided to question him. Yagyavalkya, since everything here in this world is pervaded and overcome by death, since everything is in the clutches of death, how does the sacrificer free himself from the clutches of death? Yagyavalkya replied, He does so by the Hotra priest, who has the duty of invoking the gods in a sacrifice, reciting from the Rigved. He does so by fire and by speech. The organ of speech is the Hotra of the sacrifice, and that which is speech is this divine fire. This divine fire is thus the Hotra. Therefore, he frees himself from the clutches of death through this divine fire. He gets liberation, complete liberation through it. Yagyavalkya, since everything here in this world is pervaded and overcome by day and night, how does the sacrificer free himself from the reach of day and night? He does so by the Advaryu priest, whose duty it is to prepare the various accessories for the sacrifice and offer oblations, reciting from the Yajurved. He does so by the eye and by the sun. The eye is the Advaryu of the sacrifice, and that which is his eye, that is the divine sun over there. This divine sun is thus the Advaryu, and this sun therefore frees him. It liberates him completely from the reach of days and nights. Yagyavalkya, since everything here in this world is overtaken and overcome by the bright and the dark fortnights, how does the sacrificer free himself from the reach of the dark and the bright fortnights? He does so by the Udgatra priest, who chants from the Samved. He does so by the air and by the breath. Truly, the breath is the Udgatra priest of the sacrifice, and that which is this breath is the divine air. This divine air is the Udgatra priest. This divine air frees him. It liberates him completely from the reach of the bright and the dark fortnights. Since the sky apparently is without any support, by what means of ascent, by what support does the sacrificer reach the heavenly world, Yagyavalkya? He does so by the Brahma priest, the priest who supervises the functions of the sacrifice. He does so by the mind, by the divine moon. The mind is the Brahma of the sacrifice. That which is this mind is the divine moon over there. This moon is Brahma. Thus, this divine moon is his support. This is his support for reaching the heavenly world. Yagyavalkya, all these questions up till now were concerning freedom. Now I ask you questions with regard to the achievements. Yagyavalkya, how many kinds of rig verses will the holy priest use in today's sacrifice, and what are they? He will use three kinds of verses. First, he will use the introductory verse. Then, he will use the verse accompanying the sacrifice. And finally, he will use the verse of praise. What does he win by these verses? All that is here in existence, that has breath, he wins all that. Yagyavalkya, how many kinds of oblations, how many kinds of offerings will the Advaryu priest offer in this sacrifice? Which are these? And what does he win by these? He will offer three kinds of oblations, three kinds of offerings. First are those offerings which, when offered, blaze upwards, such as wood and ghee, which is clarified butter. Second are those which, when offered, make a great noise, such as flesh. And third are those which, when offered, sink downward, such as milk and som juice. By the upward blazing offering, one wins the world of the gods, for the worlds of the gods shine brightly. By the offering that makes a great noise, one wins the world of the fathers or the ancestors, for the world of the ancestors is very noisy, since those who are in the world of the ancestors cry to be delivered from it. And by the offerings that sink downwards, one wins the world of men, for the world of men is down below, as it were. Yagyavalkya, with how many gods does the Brahma priest on the right protect the sacrifice today? With one alone, which is the mind. Since the mind, not bound by any limitations, is infinite, and the Vishwadevas are infinite, thereby he wins an infinite world. Yagyavalkya, how many hymns will the Udgatra priest chant today in the sacrifice? He will chant three hymns, beginning with the introductory hymn, followed by the hymn accompanying the sacrifice, and ending with the hymn of praise. Which are these three? With reference to the self, the introductory hymn is the in-breath. The hymn accompanying the sacrifice is the out-breath. And the hymn of praise and benediction is the diffused breath. By the introductory hymn, one wins the world of the earth. By the accompanying hymn, one wins the world of the atmosphere. And by the benedictory hymn, one wins the world of heaven. After this, Aswal kept silent, since he had no more questions to ask. Then Jarat Karva Artbhag questioned him. Yagyavalkya, how many grahas or organs of perception are there, and how many atigrahas or objects of perception are there? There are 8 grahas or organs of perception, the perceivers, and 8 atigrahas or objects of perception, their sphere of operation. The nose is a graha, a perceiver. It is controlled by the apan vayu as the object, for it is by the air that is breathed that one smells odor. Speech is a graha, a perceiver. It is controlled by name as the object, for it is by speech that one utters names. The tongue is a graha, a perceiver. It is controlled by taste as the object, for it is by the tongue that one knows tastes. The eye is a graha, a perceiver. It is controlled by form and color as the objects, for it is by the eye that one sees forms and colors. The ear is a graha, a perceiver. It is controlled by sound as the object, for it is by the ear that one hears sounds. The mind is a graha, a perceiver. It is controlled by desire as the object, for it is through the mind that one desires. The hands are grahas, are perceivers. They are controlled by actions and works as the objects, for it is by the hands that one performs actions and works. The skin is a graha, a perceiver. It is controlled by touch as the object, for it is by the skin that one feels touch. These are the 8 grahas, the 8 organs of perception, and their 8 atigrahas, their 8 objects of perception. Their 8 objects of perception. Yagyavalkya, Since everything here is food for death, since everything born is subject to death, what is that God for whom death itself is food? Fire is death for all, and fire in turn is food for water. In this way, fire, which is death for all, itself becomes food for water. He who knows this overcomes further death. Yagyavalkya, when such a liberated sage dies, do the vital breaths move up from him or do they not? No, they all gather together in him. His body swells up, it inflates, and thus inflated the dead man lies. Yagyavalkya, when such a man dies, what is it that does not leave him? The name does not leave him. The name is infinite, and infinite are the Vishwadevas. He who knows this, he wins an infinite world. Yagyavalkya, when the speech of this person enters into fire, when the breath enters into air, when the eye enters into the sun, the mind into the moon, the hearing into the quarters, the self into ether, the hairs of the body into the herbs, the hairs of the head into the trees, and the blood and the semen are deposited in water. When all his organs merge into their respective deities, what then becomes of this person? Arthbhag, my friend, take my hand. We two alone shall know of this. This is not something that should be discussed in public. The two went away and deliberated. What they said was karma, and what they praised was karma. Truly, one becomes good by good action and evil by bad action. After this, Artabhag became silent, having no more questions to ask. Bhujju Lahyaini was the next to question, and he asked, Yagyavalkya, we were travelling around as wanderers among the Madra tribe and came to the house of Patanjal Kapya. He had a daughter who was possessed by a Gandharva. We asked the Gandharva, who are you? He said, I am Sudhanvan, a descendant of Angiras. We asked him about the limits of the world, and we also asked him as to what had become of the descendants of Parikshit. And now, Yagyavalkya, I ask you the same. What has become of the descendants of Parikshit? Yagyavalkya replied, the Gandharva evidently told you that the descendants of Parikshit went there where those who perform the horse sacrifices go. And where do the performers of horse sacrifice go? 32 times the space covered by the sun's chariot in a day makes this world. Around it, covering twice the area, is the earth. Around it, covering twice the area, is the ocean. Between the two halves of the cosmic shell, there is a gap the size of the edge of a razor or of the wing of a mosquito. It is through that gap that they went out. Indra, having become a bird, delivered them to the air. Air, placing them in itself, took them to the place where the performers of the horse sacrifice were. This is why the Gandharvas praised the air. Therefore, air is both the separate individuals and also the totality of all the individuals as well. Air is both the diversity of the individuals and it is their aggregate as well. He who knows it as such, he conquers further death. After that, Bhujya Lahyaini kept silent, having nothing more to ask. Then Ushtachakrayan asked Yagyavalkya his questions. Yagyavalkya, explain to me the Brahm that is immediately present and directly perceived, and who is the self in all things. It is your very own self that is within all things. What is it that is within all things? He who breathes in with your breathing in through pranvayu is the self of yours which is in all things. He who breathes downwards with your breathing downwards through apanvayu is the self of yours which is in all things. He who breathes about with your breathing about, who pervades through vyanvayu, he is the self of yours which is in all things. He who breathes up with your breathing up, who goes out through Udan Vayu, is yourself, that is within all things. Understand this, that it is your own self which is in all things. Yagyavalkya, you have explained this in very general terms, as one might say, this is a cow, this is a horse. Explain to me in more specific terms the Brahm that is immediately present and directly perceived, that is the self in all things. Yagyavalkya replied, understand this, that it is your very self that is within all things. What is it that is within all things? You cannot see this seer of seeing. You cannot hear this hearer of hearing. You cannot think this thinker of thinking. You cannot understand this understander of understanding. He is your very self which is in all things. Everything else other than this Brahm has to and does indeed perish, but not this Brahm, for this Brahm is imperishable. After that, Usht Chakrayan kept silent, since he had nothing more to ask. Next, Kahol, son of Kausitak, asked his questions. Yagyavalkya, explain to me the Brahm that is immediately present and directly perceived, that is the self in all things. Yagyavalkya replied, it is your very own self which is in all things. This self transcends hunger and thirst. It transcends sorrow and delusion. It transcends old age and death. The Brahmins, having known that self, and having overcome the desire for sons, the desire for wealth, and the desire for the worlds, live the life of renunciates. The desire for sons is the desire for wealth, and the desire for wealth is the desire for the worlds, and both these are only desires. Therefore, a Brahmin, after he has completed his learning, should live as a child. When he has completed both the states of childhood and of learning, then he becomes a silent meditator. He lives the life of a silent meditator. Once he has completed both the non meditative and the meditative states, then he becomes a Brahmin. Then he becomes a knower of Brahm. And how does the Brahmin and how does the knower of Brahm behave, Yagyavalkya? No matter how he behaves, he is a knower of Brahm. Except for him, everything else perishes. He is imperishable. He never perishes. After that, Kahol became silent, since he had no more questions to ask. End of part 7. Om Shanti 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 Om.